The ledger Henry Witt kept. Bald is what she earned by ignoring her own body for 30 years. I'm not required to look at it over dinner. That sentence was halfway out of Lisa's mouth the moment the appetizer plates cleared the table at the Westin Kansas City at Crown Center, the night of November the 14th, 2025. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The table held 9 of us, and every one of them heard it. The room held 200, and every one of them stopped. What no one in that room heard was the 4-minute voicemail Lisa had left on our kitchen answering machine the night before. If you want more stories about men who held the line until the room finally heard it, subscribe and stay. My name is Henry Witt. I am 53. I run Witt & Sons Refrigeration out of a metal building on Main Street in Kansas City, Missouri, the same building my father, Roy Witt, ran out of from 1973 until the day his heart quit on him in 2009. We live in Brookside, 2 blocks off the Myers Circle, in the house with the red brick and the small apple tree my mother, Alma Witt, still calls my tree. I am telling you this so you can picture the room. Of all the things my father left me, the one I held on to longest was the leather ledger. A 5x8 book, dark brown, the cover rubbed soft along the spine where his thumb had worked it open 40 years in a row. Every page was his own handwriting. Every page was a part of the small empire he had built and what it was supposed to become. He did not write what it was worth. He wrote what it was for. I found the ledger the morning after the funeral in the lower drawer of the safe in our basement, underneath the warranty deeds to the 4 rental houses on Gladstone Boulevard and the family trust document he had never told me the full size of. He had been a quiet man in a loud business, and the quiet had been the backbone of every dollar. I did not open the ledger that morning. I put it back and closed the safe and stayed in the basement until my mother called down the steps to ask if I was all right. That was the first time the ledger spoke to me. The second time would be 10 years later, on a Tuesday morning in March, between the coffee pot and the door of the garage. Lisa Calloway came into our lives in 2016, when our older son, Garrett, brought her to the kitchen table for Sunday dinner. She was 25 then, and she had a manner of speaking that made you feel she was listening harder than anyone else in the room. She had a quiet laugh, a clean handshake, and a degree in accounting she had earned the slow way, working nights at a temp agency and attending classes at the community college on Troost. Garrett, 31 at the time, had just finished his apprenticeship under me and was preparing to take over the commercial side of the refrigeration business in the next year. For the first 4 years, Lisa was what my father would have called the daughter-in-law who left the impression. She helped Doris Witt with the heavy lifting when Doris's mother had her fall in 2019. She sat with my mother Alma on the long Sunday afternoons when Alma didn't want to talk but didn't want to be alone. She kept the books for Garrett's route, line by line, with a steady hand. She folded each load of laundry on the basement table so it would fit the drawers again. I did not see her as anything other than the young woman who had made my son a steady man. I told her so once, in 2019, while we were both standing at the kitchen sink drying the Thanksgiving dishes. She had said thank you in a way that made the kitchen feel warmer. I have replayed that thank you more often than I should. The first sign of distance was not Lisa. It was Garrett. He began, in 2022, to suggest we restructure the family business into an LLC so it could grow. He used that word often. Lisa was sitting beside him at the kitchen table the first time he said it. She did not look at me. She looked at the plums on the counter. I said the family business did not need to grow. It needed to stay quiet, and it needed to stay clear. The second sign was the will. Doris had hers prepared in 2023 after the breast cancer diagnosis, when the doctor at St. Luke's had given us a sober printout of the year ahead. Doris put me on as her medical power of attorney. She put Garrett on as her financial backup. She did not put Lisa on as anything. The clause was clean and Doris's choice. Garrett accepted it with a short nod. Lisa, who had been sitting at the table when Doris signed the document, said, of course," and went to rinse her coffee cup in the sink. She said, thank you for that, too. By the spring of 2024, Garrett had begun his own conversations, small ones, at the edges of things. He asked me once what would happen to the trust if I passed. I told him the trust was a wit instrument, and a wit instrument would pass to a wit. He asked me once what would happen to the 4 rental houses on Gladstone. I told him the rental houses followed the trust. He asked me once what I planned to do with the business if he could not run it. I told him the business was a wit business, and a wit business would always have a wit on the floor. The third sign of distance was the green folder. I found it on the kitchen counter one morning in May 2024, tucked behind the toaster. Inside was a draft of a contract, drawn up by a local law firm on the plaza I had never heard of, transferring 6% of the voting shares of Witt & Sons out of my name and into a new entity to be called Witt Growth Holdings. The signature lines were pre-printed. Lisa's handwriting was on the cover page, where she had written "Next Steps" in pencil. I replaced the folder exactly where I had found it, and I did not say a word at dinner that night. I did, however, place a phone call at 7 the next morning to Brennan Adler, the CPA who had done my father's books and then mine, and who knew the guarantee clause in the family trust better than I did. Brennan told me to put the folder back and bring him the kitchen answering machine. I did not yet know what was on it. I would 2 days later. Doris finished her chemo regimen at St. Luke's on the morning of November 7, 2025. Her oncologist, Dr. Anwar Kamal, shook her hand at the door of the infusion suite and told her to keep walking. She had lost her hair to the second cycle, all of it, by the 3rd week of September, and what was left under the cream-colored scarf in November was a pale scalp that I did not look away from, and would not let a single person in Brookside look away from either. We held the recovery reception on the 14th at Westin Kansas City at Crown Center, in the smaller ballroom on the 2nd floor, at 6:30 in the evening. 212 guests, the open seating plan Doris had asked for, the same playlist from our wedding I had not played in 28 years. I wore the gray suit from Kohl's my mother had pressed in the morning. Doris wore the navy dress with the cream scarf. She looked like the woman I had married, only older in the way older was supposed to look. The table Lisa and Garrett were seated at held 8 other people. Garrett's cousin Reese Witt and his wife Janet, Alma, my 81-year-old mother, who had asked to be moved from the head table to a quieter seat in the back, Doris's sister Carol and her husband Bill, our family attorney, Kate Mendoza, our family dentist, Dr. Owen Pelletier, and one of Doris's chemo nurses from St. Luke's who had become a Sunday guest at our house. The seating was pre-printed on ivory cards. The cardstock had a small monogram I had not seen in 28 years. Lisa had spoken to me once before the salads arrived. She had asked, leaning against the wall near the buffet line, whether I had thought about the family announcing a growth transition at the dinner. I told her we were honoring my wife tonight. She ran a thumb along the edge of the tablecloth and walked back to her seat. Then Lisa spoke, halfway through the dessert, to the table. She had lifted her chin a 1/4 inch. She had not raised her voice. She looked at Garrett and she said, "Bald is what she earned by ignoring her own body for 30 years. I'm not required to look at it over dinner." I did not say a word. Neither did Garrett. Neither did Reese. Kate Mendoza, who had been cutting a small square of cake for Alma, set her fork down. Alma, my mother, sipped her water. Carol, Doris's sister, asked Lisa to repeat herself because the music had been too loud near the speaker stack. Lisa did not repeat herself. She smiled and looked at her plate. Doris did not flinch. She put her glass of water on the table and watched her own reflection in the stem and drank from it. I walked my wife from the table to the elevator bank at 9:45 that night. I pressed the button for the mezzanine. I told her the room had been loud and I had not heard everything. She told me she had. She told me she was sorry I had been there to see it. I told her I was glad I had been there to see it. We went home. The following morning, before Doris woke, I pressed play on the kitchen answering machine, in the quiet of the kitchen light, with the coffee maker not yet on, at 5:42 a.m. on November the 15th. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. It was Lisa on Garrett's cell, which he had left at our house the previous Tuesday because his battery had been dead. She had called our landline the night before the reception. She had not realized we kept a tape machine in the kitchen pantry. She had not realized that for 10 years my father had used the same answering machine to take the after-hours calls for Witten Sons, and that the machine held its tapes, and that I had not thrown a single one away. In the voicemail, Lisa spoke to a colleague whose name I will not print. She laid out, in her own ordered voice, her plan to restructure the family trust after the reception. She said the reception was the moment to reset the room, meaning Doris, meaning me. She said the easiest path was to wait for Doris's hair not to come back and let the will challenge itself. She used the term diminished capacity. She used the term sunset clause. She said Garrett didn't need to know the specifics yet. She said Garrett was a sweet man, but he didn't read paper the way she did. She said the 4 Gladstone rentals and the family trust, together, cleared just under $11 million, and that the LLC conversion would net them north of $400 a year without ever touching the principal. She laughed once, briefly, when she said the word principal. She said, near the end of the voicemail, with the same measured voice she had used at the table, "Once she is gone, he folds." The kitchen light was still on. The coffee maker had not turned on. The grandfather clock in the hallway, which my father had also built, struck 6. I called Brennan Adler at 6:05. I told him what I had heard. He told me to drive the tape to his office on Ward Parkway before he opened for the day, and to bring the green folder from behind the toaster. He told me to call Kate Mendoza. He told me not to call Garrett. He told me not to call Doris. He told me, and I remember this exactly, "Henry, the only way to win a room like this is to let the room hear itself." I did not tell Doris. I told her I had a frost in the freezer at the shop and I'd be gone 2 hours. I parked at Brennan Adler's office on Ward Parkway at 7:14. The office was already lit. Kate Mendoza met me there. She had been on the second tee at Swope Park when I called. She had driven in shorts and a sweater. We made a copy of the tape on a device Brennan kept behind the front desk. We numbered the copy. We initialed the back. We numbered the green folder. We initialed the back. We agreed on a date for what Brennan called a family moment. March the 14th, 2026, at 5 in the afternoon at the Mulebach Hotel downtown in the small meeting room off the lobby, after the Family Foundation had agreed to host, on paper, a celebration of Witten Sons' 50th anniversary. The celebration would have a guest list of 12. The guest list would include the 4 rental houses' 3 board members, the Witt Foundation's 3 officers, my mother, my brother, Garrett, Lisa, and Brennan. Kate would not be in the room. She would be 2 floors up, in the law firm's office on the 14th floor, with the tape and the folder and the clock. I would be in the room. I would not be allowed to raise my voice. I would not be allowed to name Lisa by her plans. I would only be allowed to play the tape. Then the green folder. Then set the leather ledger on the table. Then watch the room hear itself. The winter between November and March was the longest of my life. I did not say a word about the tape to anyone except Brennan and Kate. I did not tell Doris. I did not tell Garrett. I did not tell Reese. I did not tell my mother, Alma. I went to the shop every morning at 6. I came home at 6. I held the freezer door for Doris when she wanted ice for her water. I sat across from Garrett at the Sunday dinners, and I listened to him talk about the new contract on the Line Creek Distribution Center, and I did not say a word. Lisa, on those Sundays, talked about the kitchen remodel and her volunteer work with the Children's Hospital in Overland Park. She did not once mention my wife's hair. I did not mention my wife's hair either. I did not mention the tape. I did not mention the fact that Garrett had asked me, in late January, what I planned to do with the family trust on a long Sunday afternoon, while Lisa was upstairs at the table folding towels in thirds, and that I had answered with a clean voice, "It will stay where my father put it." Garrett had nodded. Lisa had not come down from upstairs for the rest of the afternoon. On the morning of March the 14th, 2026, at 5 minutes to 5, I parked the old Chevrolet at the Mulebach. I went into the meeting room. I set the tape player on the credenza. I set the green folder on the credenza. I set the leather ledger on the credenza. I sat down. Garrett came in first, in a navy suit, the same suit he had worn at his own wedding. Lisa came in behind him. My mother Alma came in with my brother Otis and his wife Lena, who had driven in from Pleasant Hill. The board members and the foundation officers came in last. Brennan was already at his seat. I asked Garrett before anyone sat if I could have a word in the hallway. He came out with me. He had not yet figured this out. He had not yet figured out, on that hallway, why I had asked him. He asked me what it was about. I told him it was about the kind of man he wanted to be. He asked me, leaning against the wall near the elevator, "Dad, did Mom get worse?" I told him, gently, that his mother was still in remission. I told him the room in front of him would decide who he was from this hour forward. I told him the tape and the folder had been prepared by Brennan Adler and Kate Mendoza. I told him I had not decided to play either. He asked me if he could see them. I told him he could not yet. He asked me then the question I had been waiting on for 10 years. He asked me, "Dad, did Lisa do something to Mom?" I told him to listen. We went back into the room. I introduced the guests by name. I introduced the foundation officers. I introduced Brennan. I introduced, last, Lisa by her first name. I thanked them for coming. I told them my father, Roy Witt, had begun the refrigeration business in the back of a rented garage at 48th and Main in 1973, and that today was the day the family had agreed to honor his 50th year. I lifted the tape from the credenza and held it for 7 seconds without pressing play. I pressed play. The tape began at the kitchen answering machine. The beeps, the 4-minute voicemail. Lisa's voice in the order I had heard it. No one in the room said a word. The tape ended. The tape stopped itself. Kate's clock, 2 floors up, ticked in the silence. I set the green folder on the table. I told the room with a quiet voice that the contract in the folder was the same one Lisa had drawn up to convert 6% of Witt & Sons into Witt Growth Holdings. I did not name her. I told the room the folder had been initialed by Brennan and Kate on the morning of November the 15th. I set the leather ledger on the table. I told the room the ledger was my father's. I told the room the leather had been worked open over 40 years. I told the room the trust, the rental houses, and the foundation together sat at just under 11 million, and that every dollar was a Witt dollar, and that the guarantee clause my father had written in his own hand was not a Witt dollar to leave the family. Lisa, at the far end of the table, had not yet moved. She had both hands flat on the linen. Lisa, in the same measured voice she had used at the table at the Westin, said, "Henry, this is not how we do this in a public room." I did not answer her. Alma, my 81-year-old mother, in the cream knit sweater I had bought her at Hall's on the Plaza in 2021, sat up at the back of the table, in the seat Doris had asked for her to have. She had been silent through the tape. She had been silent through the green folder. She had been silent through the ledger. Alma, in a voice I had heard her use only twice in my life, said one sentence to the room. She said, looking at Lisa, her granddaughter by marriage, "Doris Witt is the wife my son earned, and I will not sit in a room where she is called what you've called her. And I will not have my granddaughter's name in the next room either." Lisa did not answer. Garrett did not answer. The foundation officers did not answer. The board members did not answer. No one in the room answered Alma. There was no one in the room to answer her. I lifted the tape, the folder, and the ledger off the credenza. I thanked the room for coming. I told them the foundation would, on Monday morning, mail a clean statement of where the trust stood and where every Witt dollar would stay for as long as a Witt was at the table. I told them I would not be answering questions in the room. I walked Garrett to the door. I asked him in the hallway if he had understood what Lisa had done. He told me, in a small voice, he had. I told him his mother would still love him tomorrow morning at the kitchen table. He told me he knew. I asked Garrett then if he had a question for me. He asked me, his eyes on the floor, "Dad, did I earn this?" I told him, "No, she did. And now you hold the cost." I walked my mother Alma out through the lobby, past the bar where my father had once signed the work order on the Plaza Tower chiller. I told her, at the elevator bank, that she had spoken the way my father would have spoken. She told me she had only been the woman whose kitchen the tape had come from. She told me my father would have done what I had done. She told me Doris had been the wife my father would have chosen for me. I drove the old Chevrolet back to Brookside. I parked in the garage under the single bulb my father had installed in 1973, the bulb he had used to take apart the first compressor he had ever serviced. I sat down on the workbench. I set the leather ledger on the bench beside me. I ran my thumb along the spine where my father's thumb had worn the leather soft. I did not play the tape a second time. I did not read the green folder a second time. I did not say what I had wanted to say for 120 days. I had wanted to say that Lisa had been wrong about my wife. I had wanted to say that the room had heard her wrong. I had wanted to say that the line, "Once she is gone, he folds," was the line of a woman who had mistaken the man's restraint for the man's weakness. I did not say any of that. The room had already heard it. The room had handed the cost to the right person. The room had handed the cost to the person who had put the tape there in the first place. I had wanted to say to Garrett that his wife had been wrong about his mother, and that he had been wrong about me, and that both of those truths were now his, without his mother or his father ever having to repeat them. I did not say that to Garrett either. What I did, in the quiet of the garage, under the single bulb, was set the leather ledger back into the lower drawer of the safe in our basement, underneath the warranty deeds to the 4 rental houses on Gladstone Boulevard, where my father had put it the morning after his own father's funeral. I closed the safe. I climbed the basement steps. I sat down in the kitchen. Doris was awake. She was reading a paperback at the kitchen table, in the light from the small lamp my father had installed in 1973. I poured her a glass of water with the ice from the freezer. I sat down across from her. She asked me, without looking up from the page, "Did she hear herself today?" I told her she had. She asked me, still on the page, "Did Garrett hear himself too?" I told her he had. She asked me, in the voice she had used at our wedding 29 years before, "Henry, what do we still protect?" I told her, in the same voice my father had used at his workbench under the single bulb, "The next wit who doesn't know what we own yet, Doris." She nodded. She turned the page. She turned the lamp down. I sat across from her for a long time, in the kitchen light, in the house with the red brick and the small apple tree, in the chair my brother had built me for my 40th, in the quiet of the room my parents had given us on the night of our wedding. I didn't turn the lamp down further. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say the lines I had wanted to say for 120 days. I had held the line. If you want more stories about quiet men who held the line until the room finally heard it, subscribe and stay.